Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the massive alien ship grow larger on the main screen. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast. This was it. First contact with an alien race. After 300 years of space travel, humans had finally found someone else out here among the stars. Distance to their ship? Jake asked. 2,000 meters in closing, Captain, replied the navigation officer, Lieutenant Danny Walsh. Danny was young, maybe 25, with bright eyes that showed his excitement. Like everyone else on the ship, he had dreamed of this moment his whole life. Dr. Lisa Campbell moved closer to the screen, her scientific equipment beeping softly. She was the ship's expert on alien life, though until today that had been mostly theory. "Their vessel is incredible," she whispered. "Look at those energy readings. Their technology is at least 50 years ahead of ours." Colonel Ryan Torres, the ship's military commander, frowned at her words. His job was to keep everyone safe, and hearing about superior alien technology made him nervous. "Captain, maybe we should keep our distance until we know more about their intentions." Jake shook his head. "We came out here to make contact, Colonel. We can't do that from far away." He turned to the communications officer. "Any response to our messages?" "Yes, sir. They're asking us to come aboard their ship. They say they want to meet with our leaders." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his voice calm. "Tell them we accept. Dr. Campbell, Colonel Torres, you're with me. Danny, you have the bridge." An hour later, Jake found himself walking through corridors that looked like nothing he had ever seen. The alien ship was beautiful in a cold, perfect way. Everything was smooth and white, with lights that seemed to come from nowhere. The air smelled strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. Their escort was a tall, thin creature with blue-gray skin and large, dark eyes. It moved with quick, jerky motions and spoke through a translation device that made its voice sound like music played too fast. "War Prime Veltar waits for you," it said. "He is eager to learn about your species." They entered a large room where more aliens waited. The one in the center was clearly their leader. War Prime Veltar was taller than the others, with silver markings on his skin and eyes that seemed to look right through them. "Welcome, humans," Veltar said, his translated voice smooth and friendly. "We are the Zapirian Empire. We have ruled this part of space for many centuries. We are always happy to meet new friends." Jake stepped forward and tried to smile. "I'm Captain Morrison. This is Dr. Campbell and Colonel Torres. We represent Earth and the human colonies. We're honored to meet you." Veltar's head tilted in what might have been curiosity. "Tell us about your species, Captain Morrison. How many worlds do you control? How many ships do you have? How do your people fight?" The question seemed odd to Jake, but he answered honestly. "We have colonies on 12 worlds. Our fleet has about 200 ships. As for fighting, we prefer peace, but we defend ourselves when necessary." Several Zapirians made sounds that the translator couldn't interpret. Veltar's eyes seemed to glow brighter. "Fascinating. And when faced with superior force, your people surrender to preserve their lives, yes? This is the way of all intelligent species." Dr. Campbell frowned. "Actually, humans don't usually surrender easily. Our history shows that we often fight, harder when the odds are against us." The room went very quiet. Veltar stared at her for a long moment. "Impossible. All species have the survival override. When faced with certain death, they submit to preserve the greater population. This is basic evolutionary logic." "Not humans," Colonel Torres said quietly. "We have a saying, 'Give me liberty or give me death.' Sometimes we choose death over surrender." Jake noticed that the Zapirians were looking at each other in ways that made him uncomfortable. Something was wrong here. These weren't the friendly first contact he had hoped for. "Perhaps," Veltar said slowly, "you would like to see more of our ship? We are very proud of our technology." They were led deeper into the vessel, but now Jake noticed that their escort had grown larger. More Zapirian soldiers had joined them, though they tried to make it look casual. Dr. Campbell caught his eye and nodded slightly. She had noticed too. They entered what looked like a weapons testing chamber. Veltar gestured to a target at the far end of the room. "Watch," he said. A beam of energy shot out and completely destroyed the target. The metal didn't just melt or break apart, it simply stopped existing. "Impressive," Jake said, though his mouth was suddenly very dry. "Indeed. Now imagine 1,000 such weapons aimed at one of your cities. Your people would surrender immediately to save lives, yes?" Jake looked at the empty space where the target had been. He thought about his hometown, about his sister and her kids, about all the people on Earth who were counting on this mission to bring back good news. "No," he said quietly. "They would fight." Veltar made another untranslatable sound. "Even knowing they would die?" "Especially then." The War Prime stepped closer, his large eyes studying Jake's face. "You are lying. No species is so illogical." "We're not lying," Dr. Campbell said. "And we're not illogical. We just value some things more than our own lives." That was when Jake realized they were in serious trouble. The Zapirians weren't potential friends or trading partners. They were conquerors, used to easy victories over species that would give up when threatened. And they had just learned that humans were different. "How interesting," Veltar said, and his voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. "Perhaps we should test this claim." The doors slammed shut behind them. Energy barriers flickered to life, trapping the three humans in the center of the room. Zapirian soldiers raised weapons that hummed with deadly power. "Surrender now," Veltar commanded, "and we will make your deaths quick." Jake looked at his companions. Dr. Campbell's face was pale but determined. Colonel Torres had somehow produced a small pistol from somewhere and was checking the charge. Danny's voice crackled over Jake's communicator. "Captain, are you all right? We're reading weapons powering up over there." Jake keyed his communicator. "Danny, get us out of here, maximum speed. Warn Earth that first contact has failed. Tell them we're at war." "You cannot escape," Veltar said. "Surrender and save your crew." Jake smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "You really don't understand humans at all, do you?" Colonel Torres opened, fire first, his small weapon crackling against the energy barriers. Dr. Campbell grabbed a piece of the destroyed target and threw it at the nearest Zapirian. Jake dove for cover behind a control panel and started working on the barrier controls. The aliens returned fire, their weapons far more powerful than anything the humans had. But something strange happened. Instead of cowering or begging for mercy, the humans fought harder. When Torres was hit in the shoulder, he switched the gun to his other hand and kept shooting. When Campbell was knocked down by an energy blast, she got up and kept fighting. Jake managed to overload the barrier controls and they flickered out just as the Horizon's transporters locked onto them. As the three humans dissolved in sparkles of light, Jake saw something in Veltar's eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear. They materialized on the Horizon's bridge as alarms blared throughout the ship. "Get us out of here, Danny," Jake shouted. Full speed. As the human ship raced away from the Zapirian vessel, War Prime Veltar stood in his weapons chamber, staring at the scorch marks on the walls. His soldiers looked to him for orders, but for the first time in his long career he didn't know what to say. These humans had fought back even when completely outgunned. They had chosen to fight rather than surrender, even knowing they would die. It was impossible, it was illogical, it was terrifying. "Prepare the fleet," he finally said. "We have a war to plan." Dr. Lisa Campbell woke up in pain. Her head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer, and her left arm was numb. She tried to move, but found herself strapped to a cold metal table. The room around her was white and sterile, with strange machines, humming quietly in the corners. She remembered the escape from the Zapirian ship, but everything after that was fuzzy. The Horizon must have been attacked. She hoped Jake and the others had made it to safety. A door slid open with a soft hiss, and a Zapirian entered. This one was different from the others she had seen. Its skin was darker, almost purple, and it wore what looked like a scientist's coat. Various tools hung from its belt, and its large eyes studied her with cold interest. "You are awake." "Good," it said through a translator. "I am Chief Researcher Quindal. You are my new subject." Lisa tried to keep her voice steady. What do you want from me? Answers, your species puzzles us greatly. Yesterday, 3 of your kind fought against impossible odds instead of surrendering. This behavior makes no sense. We must understand why. Quindal moved closer and Lisa could see her own reflection in its dark eyes. Every species we have encountered has what you might call a survival switch. When faced with certain death, their bodies and minds force them to surrender. It is basic biology, but you humans seem to lack this essential feature. Maybe because we're not like other species, Lisa said. Perhaps. We shall see. Quindal activated one of its machines. This device will scan your brain while I ask you questions. Do not try to lie, the machine will know. The scanner hummed to life and Lisa felt a strange tingling in her head. Images appeared on screens around the room, showing what looked like maps of her brain. Tell me about human wars, Quindal said. Lisa thought about her history classes. We've fought many wars throughout our history, sometimes for resources, sometimes for freedom, sometimes for beliefs. And in these wars, when one side was clearly losing, they surrendered to save lives. Sometimes, but not always. Many times, the losing side fought to the very end. Some of our greatest heroes died in battles they knew they couldn't win. The brain scans flickered with increased activity. Quindal studied the readings with obvious confusion. This makes no evolutionary sense. Why would a species develop such self-destructive behavior? It's not self-destructive, Lisa said. Sometimes there are things more important than survival. Freedom, protecting others, doing what's right. Illogical, Quindal muttered, but it continued the scan. Meanwhile, billions of miles away, the UES horizon limped into Earth's solar system. The ship was badly damaged from the chase, with scorch marks along its hull and several sections sealed off from vacuum. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the medical bay while Dr. Amy Richardson treated his burns. How bad is it out there? Jake asked. Amy's face was grim. We lost 12 crew members in the attack. Colonel Torres is in surgery. The ship's barely holding together. She paused. Jake, they took Lisa. The transporters grabbed us just before they could get her too. Jake closed his eyes. Lisa was one of the best people he knew, brilliant and brave. The thought of her in alien hands made his stomach turn. We'll get her back, he said. How? Did you see their weapons? Their technology is decades ahead of ours. I don't know yet, but we'll find a way. The Horizon docked at Luna Station, where Admiral Pete Hawkins was waiting. Pete was an old friend of Jake's, a tough man who had worked his way up from enlisted sailor to fleet commander. His weathered face showed the strain of the past few days. Jake, thank God you made it back, Pete said as they met in the station's command center. We've been monitoring alien ships moving in our direction. Looks like they're mobilizing for war. They are, Jake confirmed. Pete, these aren't explorers or traders. They're conquerors. They've been taking over other species for centuries, and they think we'll be easy prey. President Maria Santos joined them via video link from Earth. She was a small woman with steel in her voice. Captain Morrison, I need to know exactly what we're facing. Jake told them everything about the encounter with War Prime Veltar and the Zapirian Empire. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. So they expect us to surrender when they show superior force? President Santos asked. That's right. They seem to think all intelligent species have some kind of built-in surrender reflex. When they realize we don't, they get confused and scared. General Ben Clark, Earth's top military strategist, leaned forward. Scared? Why would superior technology be scared of us? Because we're unpredictable. They've never faced a species that fights back when the odds are hopeless. To them, we must seem insane. Back on the Zapirian research ship, Dr. Campbell was learning about her captors through painful experience. Quindal had been studying her for hours, running test after test to understand human psychology. Your brain patterns are unlike anything in our database, the alien scientist said. When I show you images of overwhelming force, your fear response activates normally, but then something else happens. Another part of your brain overrides the fear. How is this possible? Lisa gritted her teeth as another wave of scanning energy passed through her skull. Humans learn to control fear. We call it courage. Courage, Quindal repeated as if tasting the word. This is not a biological function. This is learned behavior? Yes, we teach our children to be brave, to stand up for what's right even when it's dangerous. The alien's large eyes widened. You deliberately train your offspring to ignore survival instincts? This is madness. No, Lisa said firmly. This is what makes us human. On Earth, emergency meetings were happening in every capital city. The news of hostile aliens had spread quickly, causing panic in some places and grim determination in others. Military bases worldwide were mobilizing. Factories were retooling to produce weapons and ships. Admiral Hawkins stood before a room full of Earth's top military commanders. People, we're about to fight our first interstellar war. The enemy has better technology, more ships, and centuries of experience conquering other worlds. But they have one weakness. They don't understand us. A young colonel raised her hand. Sir, how do we fight ships that can destroy our cities with single shots? We do what humans have always done when facing superior force, Pete replied. We adapt, we improvise, we refuse to give up, and we make them pay for every inch. General Clark activated a holographic display showing Earth's defenses. We have advantages they don't expect. Our manufacturing capacity, our population, and, most importantly, our willingness to fight when others would surrender. Back on the alien research vessel, Quindal was growing more frustrated by the hour. Every test revealed the same impossible result. Humans could override their own survival instincts through sheer willpower. I have studied 47 conquered species, it told Lisa. All of them had biological or cultural mechanisms that prevented self-destructive behavior. When shown overwhelming force, they submitted to preserve their populations. You humans appear to lack this basic survival feature. We have it, Lisa said. We just choose when to use it. Choose? Quindal's voice rose in pitch. Survival is not a choice, it is a biological imperative. For you, maybe. For us, some things are worth dying for. The alien stared at her for a long time. Finally, it said, War Prime Veltar believes your species can be broken like all the others. But I begin to think he is wrong. You are not broken by pain or fear or hopelessness. What would break humans? Lisa met its gaze steadily. Nothing. That's what you don't understand. The harder you push us, the harder we push back. It's who we are. That night, as Lisa lay strapped to the examination table, she heard alarms going off throughout the alien ship. Through the small window in her cell, she could see human ships in the distance, their running lights like angry stars against the black of space. Jake had kept his promise. They had come for her. Quindal burst into the room, its usual calm replaced by obvious agitation. Your ships are attacking our forward scouts. They are outnumbered 10-1, yet they continue to fight. This is impossible behavior. Lisa smiled, despite her pain. Now you're starting to understand we don't know how to quit. The alien scientist stared at her, and for the first time Lisa saw something like fear in its large dark eyes. What have we awakened? It whispered. Outside, the first battle of humanity's first interstellar war had begun, and the Zapirians were about to learn that humans were unlike any species they had ever encountered. The harder they pushed, the harder humans would push back. 6 months after the first contact disaster, War Prime Veltar stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Victory. Around him, the largest fleet in Zapirian history moved through space like a metal storm. 500 warships, each one capable of destroying a city with a single shot. Status report, Veltar commanded. His second-in-command, Subprime Kethel, checked the displays. All ships report ready, War Prime. The human colonies lie just ahead. Their primitive fleet is already moving to intercept us. Veltar studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The humans had maybe 50 ships total, old and crude compared to Zapirian technology. This would be over quickly, just like every other conquest in the Empire's long history. Open a communication channel to the human fleet, he ordered. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Commander Alex Turner received the incoming message. Alex was young for a ship commander, only 32. but the emergency had forced rapid promotions throughout the human fleet. His crew was a mix of regular Navy and hastily trained volunteers, all of them knowing they were about to face impossible odds. "Put it on screen," Alex said. War Prime Veltar's image appeared, tall and imposing. "Human commander, you are outnumbered 10-1. Your ships are inferior to ours. Surrender now and we will make your deaths quick. Continue this foolish resistance, and we will make your entire species suffer." Alex looked around his bridge, at the faces of his crew. He saw fear there, but also determination. These people had volunteered to stand between Earth and an alien invasion force. They knew they might die today. "Zapirian commander," Alex replied, "I have a message for you, from the human race." He paused, then smiled grimly. "Go to hell." The communication cut off. On the Eternal Victory, Veltar stared at the empty screen in disbelief. "Did that primitive just refuse our generous offer?" "It appears so, War Prime," Kethel said nervously. Veltar's anger flared. "Then they will learn the price of defying. The Empire! All ships, open fire, destroy them!" The space around Proxima Station erupted in violence. Zapirian energy beams, each one capable of cutting through a mountain, lanced out toward the human fleet. Several human ships exploded immediately, their crews dying in bursts of light and metal. But the surviving human ships didn't retreat. Instead, they accelerated toward the alien fleet, firing every weapon they had. On the UES Retribution, Captain Nicole Grant watched her tactical display as her ship shook under enemy fire. "Damage report," she shouted over the noise of alarms. "Forward shields down 60%, her weapons officer called back. "Hull breach on deck 7, we're losing atmosphere." "Seal it off and keep fighting," Nicole ordered. She had served in the Navy for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. The enemy firepower was beyond anything humans had ever faced. A Zapirian beam struck the Retribution's engine section, and the ship lurched violently. Half the lights went out, and the artificial gravity flickered. "Captain, we've lost main power," the engineer reported. "Engines are offline. We're a sitting duck." Nicole looked at her crew. They were scared, but they were still at their posts. "Switch to auxiliary power. All remaining energy to weapons. If we're going down, we're taking some of them with us. On ye." The Zapirian flagship, Veltar, watched the battle with growing confusion. The human ship that had just been crippled should be surrendering or trying to escape. Instead, it was still firing, even as Zapirian ships closed in around it. "War Prime," his tactical officer reported. "The damaged human vessel is not requesting terms of surrender. It appears to be ramming course with our cruiser Bright Talon." "Ramming course?" Veltar couldn't believe what he was hearing. "That is suicide. Their crew will die." "Yes, War Prime, but they will also destroy the Bright Talon." Veltar watched in horror as the human ship, engines dead and hull on fire, used its remaining maneuvering thrusters to slam into the Zapirian cruiser. Both ships disappeared in a massive explosion. "Impossible," he whispered. "No species commits suicide in battle." But the humans weren't finished. Across the battlefield, damaged human ships were making desperate attacks. The UES Courage, with its weapon systems destroyed, rammed a Zapirian destroyer. The UES Liberty, venting atmosphere from a dozen holes, flew directly into the firing arc of an alien dreadnought and detonated its own ammunition stores. On the UES Phoenix, Engineering Chief Tony Martinez crawled through smoke-filled corridors, trying to reach the damaged power core. The ship had been hit so many times that most systems were offline, but Tony wasn't giving up. "Martinez to bridge," he called over his communicator. "I can jury-rig the power systems, but I need 5 minutes." "We don't have 5 minutes," came the reply from Captain Foster. "Enemy boarding shuttles are docking now." "Then hold them off," Tony said, grabbing a plasma cutter from his toolkit. "I'm not letting this ship die without a fight." The Zapirian boarding parties expected to find frightened, surrendering humans. Instead, they faced desperate resistance in every corridor. Medical Officer Dr. Amy Richardson, who had never held a weapon in her life, fought alongside Marines with whatever she could find. Cook's assistant Billy Chen used kitchen knives against alien soldiers with energy weapons. What disturbed the Zapirians most was that wounded humans kept fighting. A Marine with a broken leg continued to shoot from behind cover. A bridge officer with severe burns stayed at her post, coordinating damage control even as the ship fell apart around her. On the Eternal Victory, Subprime Kethel approached his commander with obvious distress. "Warprime, we are winning the battle, but our casualties are unprecedented. We have lost 37 ships." 37? Veltar was shocked. In most Zapirian conquests, they lost maybe 1 or 2 ships to accidents. How is this possible? The humans refuse to surrender even when their ships are destroyed. They fight until they die. Many of our ships have been lost to ramming attacks and close-range explosions. Veltar studied the tactical display. The human fleet was almost gone, but each ship had taken multiple Zapirian vessels with it. What kind of species commits mass suicide rather than surrender? Perhaps, Kethel said quietly, they do not see it as suicide. Perhaps they see it as something else. On the dying UES Defiance, Commander Turner held his wounded communications officer as the ship's bridge filled with smoke. Half his crew was dead, the other half injured, but they were still fighting. "Sir," his weapons officer called out, "we've got 1 torpedo left and enough power for 1 shot." Turner looked at the tactical display. A Zapirian command ship was less than a kilometer away, its shields down for repairs. 1 torpedo wouldn't normally damage such a large vessel, but if they could get close enough. "All hands, this is the captain," Turner announced over the ship's intercom. "We've got 1 chance to make these aliens remember us. Hold on." The Defiance, engines failing and hull cracking, turned toward the alien command ship. The torpedo launch tube was damaged, so they would have to get within point-blank range. Zapirian weapons tore into the human ship as it approached, but Turner held course. At the last second, he fired the torpedo and pulled the manual detonator for the ship's remaining ammunition. The explosion lit up space for thousands of kilometers. When the light faded, both ships were gone. On the Eternal Victory, Veltar stared at the empty space where his command ship had been. Admiral Hethanol had been his friend for 2 centuries. Now he was gone, destroyed by creatures that should have surrendered hours ago. "Warprime," his tactical officer reported. "The last human ship has been destroyed. The battle is over." Veltar looked at the casualty reports. They had won, but at a cost unlike anything in Zapirian history. 41 ships destroyed, thousands of soldiers dead, all to defeat 50 primitive human vessels. "Prepare the occupation force," he said finally. "We will take their colony and learn why these humans are so different." But as Zapirian troops landed on Proxima Station, they found that the battle in space had been only the beginning. The human colonists, led by people like mining supervisor Sam Rodriguez and teacher Kelly Price, had no intention of surrendering either. They had built barricades in the streets. They had hidden weapons in schools and hospitals. They had turned their entire colony into a fortress, and they were ready to fight. When the first Zapirian soldier demanded surrender, 12-year-old Emma Walsh, whose father had died on the WE station's defense platforms, threw a rock at its head and ran. The Zapirians realized that they weren't just fighting human ships or human soldiers. They were fighting an entire species that simply didn't know how to quit. Warprime Veltar stood in the ruins of the colony's main street, watching his soldiers struggle to control a population that refused to be controlled. For the first time, in his long military career, he wondered if the Zapirian Empire had made a terrible mistake. These humans were unlike anything they had ever encountered, and they were just getting started. 2 years had passed since the battle at Proxima Station, and the war had become something no Zapirian had ever experienced. What was supposed to be a quick conquest had turned into a grinding nightmare that consumed ships, soldiers, and resources at an alarming rate. On the occupied world of New Terra, Sub-Commander Yethkar crouched behind the ruins of what had once been a human school. His squad of 12 soldiers had been hunting human resistance fighters for 3 days, and they were no closer to finding them than when they started. "Movement in the next building," whispered Corporal Zindal. pointing toward a collapsed apartment complex. I saw someone on the third floor. Yethkar sighed. In 2 years of occupation duty, he had learned to hate these urban hunts. The humans never fought fair. They used improvised explosives, sniper attacks, and ambushes. They struck at supply convoys and disappeared into the ruins before reinforcements could arrive. Proceed with caution, he ordered. Remember, they could have booby-trapped the entire building. As they moved forward, Yethkar thought about his homeworld, where he had been a teacher before the war. He had volunteered for military service because it was supposed to be easy duty, helping to civilize primitive species. Instead, he found himself in a war zone where the enemy never stopped fighting. Inside the building, Sam Rodriguez watched the alien soldiers through a crack in the wall. Sam had been a mining engineer before the invasion, but now he led a resistance cell of 37 humans. They lived in the ruins, moving from hideout to hideout, striking at the occupiers whenever they could. "How many?" whispered Kelly Price, who had been a high school science teacher. Now she was Sam's explosives expert, having learned to make bombs from mining equipment and household chemicals. 12, Sam replied quietly. "Same as last time. They're being careful." Kelly nodded and checked her improvised detonator. "The charges are ready. When they reach the stairwell, I'll blow the supports. The whole floor will come down on them." Sam looked at the faces of his people. They were tired, hungry, and scared, but they were still fighting. Mrs. Patterson, who had taught kindergarten, now carried a rifle. Teenager Bobby Chen ran messages between resistance cells. Even 10-year-old Lucy Martinez helped by watching for enemy patrols. "Remember," Sam said softly. "After we hit them, we scatter. Meet at Safe House 7 in 3 hours. If anyone doesn't make it, we'll keep fighting," Kelly finished. It was what they always said. No matter who died, no matter how hopeless things seemed, the survivors would keep fighting. The Zapirian soldiers entered the building, their weapons ready. They moved professionally, checking corners and watching for traps, but they couldn't watch everywhere at once. Kelly's explosion brought down half the building. When the dust settled, 6 Zapirian soldiers were dead and the rest were trapped under rubble. The humans were already gone, vanished into the maze of destroyed streets. Sub-Commander Yethkar pulled himself from the debris, bleeding from a dozen cuts. This was the 3rd ambush this week. High Command kept sending reports about victories and conquered territories, but down here in the ruins, it felt like they were losing. On Earth, Dr. Lisa Campbell stood in a military laboratory, studying captured Zapirian technology. She had escaped from the alien research ship 6 months earlier during a human rescue mission, but the experience had changed her. She now worked with physicist Dr. Nathan Cross and engineer Paula Mitchell to develop new weapons. "The power source is incredible," Nathan said, pointing to the alien device on the table. "It's a fusion reactor smaller than a briefcase, but it produces more energy than our largest power plants. The problem is the control systems," Paula added. "Everything is designed for their biology. The interfaces won't work with human hands." Lisa studied the readings on her tablet. "We don't need to copy their technology exactly. We just need to understand it well enough to find weaknesses." She had learned something important during her captivity. The Zapirians had never needed to build weapons for long wars. Their conflicts always ended quickly when the enemy surrendered. Their technology was powerful but not designed for extended combat. "Look at these power consumption patterns," she said, highlighting data on the screen. "Their ships use massive amounts of energy for shields and weapons, but they can't maintain it for long periods. That's why they prefer short, decisive battles." Nathan's eyes lit up. "So if we can force them into prolonged engagements, their ships will run out of power," Paula finished. "They'll have to retreat or become sitting ducks." Meanwhile, in space above New Geneva colony, the longest siege in Zapirian history was entering its 8th month. Major Linda Hayes stood on the colony's command center, watching enemy ships orbit overhead like mechanical vultures. Linda had been a logistics officer before the war, managing supply shipments between colonies. Now she commanded the defense of an entire world with just 3,000 Marines and 10,000 civilian volunteers. "Status report," she called to her staff. Food supplies are holding, reported Sergeant Mike Torres. The underground farms are producing enough to keep us going for another 6 months. Ammunition is getting low, added Lieutenant Sarah Kim. We're down to 60% of normal stockpiles. Linda nodded grimly. The Zapirians had expected New Geneva to surrender after a few weeks of bombardment. Instead, the humans had dug in deeper, building underground shelters and hidden weapon emplacements. They're sending another surrender demand, the communications officer announced. Same response as always, Linda said. Tell them to go pound sand. On the Zapirian command ship above, War Prime Kethel read the human response with growing frustration. He had replaced Veltar after the first year of the war, when the original commander had suffered what their doctors called nervous exhaustion. The humans called it a breakdown. 8 months, Kethel muttered to his aide. 8 months besieging one small colony. In our entire history, we have never spent more than a few days conquering a world. The humans are persistent, his aide replied carefully. Perhaps we should consider different tactics. Kethel studied the tactical display. They had orbital superiority and could bombard the colony at will, but the humans had built their defenses underground. Every time the Zapirians destroyed a surface installation, the humans built 3 more in hidden locations. Increase the bombardment, he ordered. Surely they will break eventually. But down in the colony's command bunker, Major Hayes was preparing for another assault. The Zapirians had been saying, surely they will break eventually for 8 months, not understanding that humans grew stronger under pressure, not weaker. On Earth, Admiral Pete Hawkins met with President Maria Santos and General Ben Clark to discuss the war's progress. The news was mixed. Humanity was losing ground, but the cost to the Zapirians was enormous. Our intelligence suggests they've lost over 40% of their invasion fleet, General Clark reported. That's unprecedented in their military history. But they're still winning, President Santos pointed out. They control 6 of our colonies and have fleets moving toward Earth. Admiral Hawkins leaned forward. Ma'am, they're winning battles, but I don't think they're winning the war. Our psychological warfare division has been monitoring their communications. Their soldiers are suffering from what we recognize as combat fatigue. They're not used to prolonged conflict. What do you mean? The president asked. Their entire military doctrine is based on quick, overwhelming victories followed by easy occupation. They've never faced an enemy that refuses to stay defeated. It's breaking their morale. General Clark nodded. We're seeing evidence of this in occupied territories. Zapirian units are requesting transfers after just a few months of occupation duty. Some are refusing orders to engage resistance cells. On New Terra, Sub-Commander Yethkar sat in his quarters, staring at a message from his family. His daughter had asked when he was coming home. He didn't know how to answer. 2 years ago, he had expected to be home in a few months with stories of glorious conquest. Instead, he was trapped in an endless war against an enemy that simply would not quit. Every day brought new ambushes, new explosions, new evidence that the humans would never accept defeat. His aide knocked on the door. Sir, there's been another attack on Supply Convoy 7. The humans hit the escorts with rocket launchers and escaped before our reinforcements arrived. Yethkar closed his eyes. Casualties? 15 dead, 12 wounded. The convoy was completely destroyed. That convoy had been carrying medical supplies and food for Yethkar's troops. Now his soldiers would go hungry for another week while High Command tried to organize a replacement shipment through hostile territory. Sir, his aide said quietly, some of the troops are asking, when will this end? Yethkar looked at the young soldier. He was barely old enough to serve, and his eyes held the hollow look that came from too much combat. I don't know, Yethkar admitted. The humans show no signs of surrendering. But surely they must realize they cannot win, Yethkar thought, about the human prisoners he had interrogated. Even facing torture and death, they had maintained their defiance. Some had actually smiled when told their situation was hopeless. I don't think they care if they can win, he said finally. I think they fight because that's what humans do. Back in her resistance hideout, Kelly Price were. 3 years after first contact, the Zapirian Empire faced a crisis unlike any in their long history. War Prime Kethel stood before the High Council on their homeworld, delivering a report that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Honored counselors, he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The human war continues. Our forces control 7 of their colonies, but the cost has been enormous. We have lost 60% of our invasion fleet. Morale among our troops is at critical levels. Many units are requesting transfers rather than face continued human resistance. Elder Kethmar, the oldest member of the council, leaned forward. War Prime, you have had 3 years and unlimited resources. How is this small species still fighting? Kethel activated a holographic display showing casualty reports. Honored Elder, the humans are unlike any species we have encountered. They do not surrender when beaten. They do not negotiate when outnumbered. They simply continue fighting. But surely they must realize the futility of their position, another counselor asked. With respect, counselor, I believe that is exactly what makes them dangerous. They know they are losing, but they fight harder because of it, not despite it. On Earth, humanity was indeed losing the war in the traditional sense. 7 colonies were occupied, the fleet was outnumbered, and Zapirian ships were moving toward the home system. But something had changed in the 3 years of fighting. Humanity had evolved. Admiral Pete Hawkins stood in the command center of Luna Station, surrounded by displays showing the approaching enemy fleet. This would be the final battle, the one that would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or became another conquered race in the Zapirian Empire. Final fleet status? He asked his aide. 230 ships, sir. Everything we could build, repair, or salvage. The Zapirians have 400. Pete nodded grimly. The numbers were bad, but numbers had never told the whole story of this war. What about our special modifications? All ships have been fitted with the new power drain weapons Dr. Campbell designed, and every ship has been equipped with the emergency protocols. The emergency protocols. Pete had hoped they would never need to use them, but the approaching Zapirian fleet was the largest ever assembled. If humanity was going to make a stand, it had to be here, now, with everything they had. On the approaching Zapirian flagship, the Infinite Dominion, War Prime Kethel prepared for what he hoped would be the final battle of this cursed war. The humans had gathered their remaining fleet around their home system, exactly as his strategists had predicted. All ships report ready, War Prime, his tactical officer announced. The humans have 230 vessels. We outnumber them nearly 2 to 1. Good, Kethel said, though he felt no satisfaction. 3 years of war had taught him that numerical superiority meant little against humans. They would fight until every ship was destroyed, taking as many Zapirians with them as possible. Open a channel to the human fleet, he ordered. Perhaps they will finally see reason. On the bridge of the UES Defiant, Admiral Hawkins received the incoming transmission. The original Defiance had been destroyed in the first major battle, but the name lived on. Humanity had learned to honor its heroes by continuing their fight. Kethel's image appeared on the screen, and Pete was struck by how tired the alien commander looked. 3 years of war had aged him visibly. Human Admiral, Kethel said, your fleet is outnumbered. Your colonies are conquered. Your people face extinction. I offer you one final chance to surrender with honor. Submit now, and your species will be granted a place in the Empire as valued citizens. Pete looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were young, most of them, having replaced the generation that had died in the early battles. But they had the same look he had seen on human faces throughout this war, determination mixed with defiance. Zapirian Commander, Pete replied, I have a counteroffer for you. Leave our system now and we won't have to teach you another lesson about underestimating humans. Kethel's expression darkened. You cannot be serious. You are about to face annihilation. Maybe, Pete admitted. But we've been facing annihilation for 3 years and we're still here. The question is, are you willing to pay the price to finish us? The transmission ended and both fleets began their final approach. What followed was the largest space battle in human history. Zapirian ships, sleek and powerful, exchanged fire with human vessels that had been repaired so many times they looked like metal patchwork. But the humans had learned from 3 years of warfare. Dr. Campbell's power drain weapons worked exactly as designed. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting as Zapirian vessels found their energy reserves depleting faster than expected. The aliens' superior technology became useless when they couldn't power it. On the UES Liberty, Captain Jennifer Walsh watched her tactical display as enemy fire tore through her ship's hull. Half her crew was dead. The engines were failing and life support was running on backup power. "Captain," her weapons officer called out, "we've lost main guns. Only the missile tubes are still working." Jennifer looked at the massive Zapirian dreadnought bearing down on them. One ship like that could destroy an entire human colony, but it was also running low on power after hours of combat. "Load all remaining missiles," she ordered. "Set them for proximity detonation." "Ma'am, at this range the explosion will destroy us too." Jennifer smiled the same smile that had terrified Zapirians for 3 years. "I know. Fire when ready." The Liberty's sacrifice took the dreadnought with it, but more importantly, it showed the watching Zapirian fleet that humans were still willing to trade their lives for strategic advantage. On the Infinite Dominion, Kethel watched ship after ship disappear from his tactical display. They were winning, but barely. The humans were making every victory cost more than it was worth. "War Prime," his aide reported. "We're receiving reports from occupied colonies. Human resistance cells are launching coordinated attacks. They're hitting supply depots, communication centers, and troop barracks simultaneously." Kethel closed his eyes. Even facing extinction, the humans were still fighting on multiple fronts. "Casualties?" "Heavy, sir. Some garrison units are reporting 50% losses." On New Geneva, Major Linda Hayes led her colonial defenders in their final breakout attempt. After 8 months of siege, the Zapirians had finally broken through their outer defenses. But instead of surrendering, the humans had prepared for this moment. "All units, this is Hayes," she broadcast over the emergency channel. "Execute Operation Defiance. Hit them with everything we have." Hidden weapons emplacements throughout the colony opened fire simultaneously. Civilians who had been pretending to surrender suddenly produced concealed weapons. The Zapirians found themselves fighting not just soldiers but an entire population that refused to be conquered. Back in the space battle, Admiral Hawkins watched his fleet dwindle to less than 50 ships. The Zapirians had maybe 100 left, but they were pulling back, trying to reorganize. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zapirian commander. He's requesting a ceasefire." Pete stared at the display in shock. In 3 years of war, no Zapirian commander had ever requested a pause in fighting. They either won quickly or died trying. "Put him through." Kethel's image appeared again, but now he looked different. Defeated maybe, but also thoughtful. "Human Admiral, I propose we discuss terms." "Terms of surrender?" Pete asked. "Terms of coexistence." The word hung in space between the two fleets, on both sides, exhausted. Crews waited to see what would happen next. "You're not offering surrender?" Pete asked carefully. "No," Kethel admitted. "I have finally learned what my predecessors could not understand. You cannot be conquered. Not truly. Even if we destroyed every human ship and occupied every human world, some of you would still be fighting. You would fight until the last human died, and then your children would fight after you." Pete was quiet for a long moment. "And you find that disturbing?" "I find it terrifying," Kethel said honestly. "But also impressive. In 3 years, you have taught the Zapirian Empire something we thought impossible. Sometimes the spirit of a people matters more than the size of their fleet." 6 months later, representatives from both species met on a neutral space station to sign the first treaty in Zapirian history that recognized another species as equals. The war was over, not because one side had won, but because both sides had learned to respect each other. Dr. Campbell, now serving as Earth's chief xenobiologist, worked alongside chief researcher Quindal to establish scientific exchange programs. The alien scientist who had once studied her like a laboratory specimen now sought to understand human culture through cooperation rather than conquest. "Your species is remarkable," Quindal told her during one of their meetings. "We have studied 47 conquered races, but none like yours. You fight not just with weapons, but with something we had never encountered before." "What's that?" Lisa asked. "Hope. Even when you were losing, even when death was certain, you never stopped hoping that somehow, some way, you would find a path to victory. That hope made you dangerous in ways we could never predict." On Earth, children learned about the war in school, but they also learned about the peace that foe.